What happens when one man tries to watch all of the horror films of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project. Like I said in the last episode, the month of October was absolutely jammed full of horror movies in 82. And almost this entire block is still the spooky month, but we'll finally break out of it here. And we're getting close to the end of the year. After this one, there's just 2 episodes left of 82. But this one is pretty epic with anthologies, Aztec gods, and centipedes? We're starting off in Canada, and up there on October 23rd, Deadly Eyes was released, although it would get an American run in April of 83. And this sometimes went by the title of Night Eyes. And I don't know if you remember an episode or 2 back when I mentioned Sam Groom in Deadly Games and said that he'd appear in another film this year with Deadly in the title. Well, this is it. He's a teacher, and one of the Felix Leiters is here, and one of Paul's students has a crush on him, and she's Lisa Long-Lois, who we just saw on the Sci-Fi Project in class of 1984. But she's been here as well, back in 1980 with Phobia, and 81 with Happy Birthday to Me. There's also this company with all of this feed grain that's been injected with steroids, and a health inspector orders it all to be destroyed. And Dick Halloran works for that company, and they burn it all. Leslie Donaldson is here too, and we've also seen her in a few films, including Funeral Home in 80, and oh, look, Happy Birthday to Me as well. But it turns out that there were a bunch of rats there chowing on the superfood, so they've grown to massive size. And they're put out of their home by the fire and have to go elsewhere, attacking. And oh my god, look at these little guys. Who can be mad at them when they're this cute? Well, they proceed to eat an entire little kid, which is pretty ballsy. And after a string of further rat appearances, it's up to Paul to figure out what's going on while starting up a new relationship with Kelly. And this one is from Robert Klaus. And he's not the sort of guy that normally shows up here, since most of his works are action-oriented. I mean, this is the guy who did Enter the Dragon, and Game of Death with Bruce Lee, and then later Battle Creek Brawl with Jackie Chan, and then most importantly, Gymkata. There's even a tribute to that here, as the characters go see Game of Death. This was very loosely adapted from an old James Herbert novel called The Rats, and the rat stuff is mainly done 2 ways. In close-ups, it's pretty easy to tell that they're hand puppets, but for the full body shots, they dressed up dachshunds in little costumes, which is why they're so damned adorable. Reviews weren't great, with the biggest hater being Herbert himself, who called it absolute rubbish, but it ended up getting a nice-sized cult following, and even got a remake in 2002 with a film called The Rats. And I really enjoy this. I give this a 3.5. There's some nice character stuff happening, and oh my god, do I love seeing those puppers and jackets running around. Its significance is just a 2 though, since it's got a small cult following, but it's still fairly unknown and doesn't have a lot of horror names attached. Should you watch it? Yes, indeed. Go look at some dog rats. This is another one that didn't get an American release until 1983, but on October 24th in 82, in France, The Clairvoyant was released, although it was also known as The Killing Hour. It begins with pulling a body out of the Hudson River with handcuffs on, and then right after, a guy is cuffed to a ladder in a swimming pool and drowns, and then another man is cuffed and electrocuted. The police are on the case, and it's an all-star lineup with Baron Harkonnen, Miles Dyson, and a super thin and nearly recognizable guy who keeps getting the hi-hat. Detective Weeks, who is also a stand-up comic and also on the job, and he meets up with a TV show host named Mac, played by Perry King, who we just saw in class of 1984. But If that's not enough characters, then we also have Verna, an aspiring artist who keeps drawing the murders before they happen. The killer sends notes taunting that he'll never be caught, and they start to try to work it out and find their man before he kills again. Verna ends up going to the police to tell them about her drawings and says the first time something like this happened was when she helped recover a little lost girl when she was much younger. The plot thickens when it turns out that the little girl she helped was in fact that first victim, hinting that Verna's ties to the case run even deeper than she thinks. And this is another entry from Armand Mastroianni, and it was only his second film, with the first one being 1980's He Knows You're Alone, and he'll appear again a few times in future years. His previous film got a lot of comparisons to Halloween, although you won't get that here, but it did get tagged as a giallo throwback in a way, and it vaguely plays down the slasher stuff in favor of the police investigation and Verna's abilities. The killings were based on the Son of Sam murders, and this one wasn't given a US run. 20th Century Fox bought the rights to it, but then decided against putting it in theaters, only releasing it in France, and then Sweden. It did have a screening in Texas in '83, but then went to video in 1984. However, when put out on video, they chose to change the title to The Killing Hour, as they didn't think that the typical American video renter knew what a clairvoyant was. It also got the attention of the UK Video Nasty List, and although they didn't prosecute it, they did seize and confiscate it. And I like this, but it's a little all over the place. I give it a 3. It just tends to wander around a little much and introduce different elements without following up on them much. Its significance is a 2, since it's fairly obscure and not talked about, but it got the nasty attention and had the rare horror film for Mastroianni. Should you watch it? It's worth a watch, yeah.
It wasn't funny. She used to emit prodigious amounts of gas, and well, kids are merciless. They used to call her Earth, Wind, and Fire.
We're headed to Italy now, and this one came out on October 28th there, and it was released in the US in 1984, and it's Tenebrae. It has a famous author named Peter Neal, and he's in Rome to promote his new book. Anya Pironi, the third mother from Inferno, shows up as a shoplifter, and we just saw her in the house by the cemetery, and she's murdered by a man who shoves pages of Peter's book in her mouth. Nancy's dad is on hand, as is Christian Borromeo, who we haven't seen since 1980 with Estigma and The House on the Edge of the Park. Peter's assistant Anne is played by Daria Nicolodi, and we've already seen her before in 1980's Inferno, so we've got a pretty full cast here. The killer calls him, and someone is having dreams about being beaten by a woman on a beach. The murders continue, and Peter teams up with a police detective, Detective Germani, to figure out his connection to the deaths and solve the case. And this is the second appearance on the project for the great Dario Argento, with Inferno being the previous one, that, as I said, featured several of the performers here. After his run of films that feature a more supernatural element as well as a more stylistic approach, this one was a more back-to-basics feature, as he went back to the giallo format that he had been known for previously. It was partially inspired by real life, as the director had received a number of threatening phone calls about how his movies were damaging. Many thought this was a bit strange, since his two previous films were the first two parts of what was called the Three Mothers trilogy, so people were looking for the third part of that, only to have this released instead. But after Inferno wasn't well received, and Argento had a hard time making it, he decided to move into something that he was more comfortable with. Plus, he felt that so many other directors had started making films that were derivative of his that he wanted to do a giallo-style film again to show how it should be done. There was tension on the set, as it seemed as if Argento and Anthony Franciosa didn't quite get along, and there was also some issues with Daria Nicolodi. Her and Argento were a couple, but after he didn't give her a story credit for Suspiria, which she stated she contributed to, they were on shaky ground. Because of this, she asked for a smaller role in this one, but when the actress that was meant to play Anne dropped out, Argento convinced her to take on the bigger part. It did okay, but didn't do as much business as his previous works, and of course was criticized for the amount of violence. In fact, it was declared a video nasty in the UK and was prosecuted and banned from sale there. It's considered to not have had the same impact as some of his earlier films, but has still proven to be influential, with many referring to it as the director's last great film. And I like it a lot. I give it a 4. And I think this is the first of Argento's giallo-style films that I saw, so I may have a certain nostalgia for it. But I like the mood, like the mystery, and think that there's some great moments happening. Its HCS is a 3.5 since it's from Argento and has been seen quite a bit, but definitely didn't have the reach that some of his others did and didn't impact the genre as much. Should you watch it? Absolutely, this is a good one. Back in the US on the 29th, just a couple of days before Halloween, it's Trick or Treats. And note that S on the end because it's not Trick or Treat or Trick or Treat. It's Trick or Treats. We have a married couple, and it's Carrie Snodgrass, who we last saw in 1980's The Attic, and John Carpenter's good buddy, Peter Jason. Joan has her husband Malcolm institutionalized, and one of his captors is the mustache man from Looker. It then jumps ahead a couple of years, and we meet Linda here, and her boyfriend is, oh, hey, Steve Railsback. I just said in the last episode that we'd be seeing him more, and what do you know? Here he is. Although he's not in this much, and was the husband of Jacqueline Giroux here in real life at the time. So, Joan has gotten remarried to Kung Fu Kane, and they're off to a party, leaving little Christopher with Linda as his babysitter. He's a pretty devious little brat, though, and plays pranks on her to make it look like he's hurt, and also wears this jacket.
Hey, I'm cool.
Well, yeah, in that jacket, I mean, who wouldn't be? Meanwhile, Malcolm decides to bust out of the sanitarium and heads home where that damn kid keeps on playing pranks, and Linda keeps on falling for them, like one after another. She just keeps on believing whatever silly thing he's pulling. Like, you would think that after the 5th one, that she would be like, hey, yeah, kid, whatever. And what's hilarious is that Malcolm escapes the hospital by dressing as a nurse, and every single person that he encounters just thinks he's a woman and can't tell that it's simply Peter Jason in a wig. There's a quick appearance by Paul Bartel, and between him, Railsback, and Carradine, there's a good number of name stars here that just don't factor into the main action, like, at all. So this was both written and directed by Gary Graver, and he's mostly known by his alter ego, Robert McCallum, the name that he uses for X-rated films, of which he has directed over 100 of, going back to the 70s. He did work on a handful of mainstream films as well, and one of them was The Attic from 1980, which he directed a portion of, uncredited, and it was on that film that he met Snodgrass and they formed a friendship, leading her to appear here, even using her house as the location for most of the film. This had a tiny budget of a mere $55,000, most of which was Graver's own money, and only got a limited release in a handful of cities, but then took on a new life on VHS. And I just have this one as at a 2. I do like its vibe, and it has some fun Halloween stuff, but way too much time is spent with Christopher's pranks, and it doesn't become a horror movie until well after an hour in. Its significance is a 2 as well, because it's got a bit of notoriety and does have some names in it, but it didn't really leave much of a mark and isn't frequently talked about. Should you watch it? I mean, it's an okay watch, but it's also pretty skippable.
You quit playing with yourself.
If you have a thing about bugs, you're probably gonna want to skip this next one because in Hong Kong, also on October 29th, there was Centipede Horror. And I feel like this is gonna live up to its name here. And a voiceover tells us all about them. There's then a couple of girls on vacation. One has been given a necklace to ward off bad spirits, but she says it's too heavy and won't wear it. They're then both attacked by a bunch of centipedes and put into the hospital. Kay's brother wants to find out what happened to her to see if he can find out the cause of her new sickness, but it gets worse and she dies, with centipedes coming out of her wounds. He continues his investigation and is soon apparent that he's being watched and discovers that his family holds a deep, dark secret. He soon learns about a terrible centipede curse, and yep, before long, the peds are after him. And the man behind this one is Keith Lee, and he was involved in a lot of Hong Kong films, but only directed 3. This was his first one, but he had previously done second unit work and assistant directing before this. And this movie had a reputation. For quite a while, it was very hard to track down, and often referred to as one of the most disgusting films of all time, mainly due to the large amount of squirming bugs on hand. It never got any sort of American release until recently, but was passed around on the bootleg circuit, with even those being hard to find and in poor quality. Recently though, in 2020, it was restored from a 35mm print and then giving a further 2K restoration and made available. As this one goes on, it gets crazier and crazier with weird nude spells and voodoo dolls, some animal cruelty, and bugs, but not as many as you would think. There's a long gap between centipede action, but when they do come back, they're all over the place. But there's also chicken skeletons. And I'm giving this one a 2.5. There's some wild and crazy fun moments here, but there's just not enough interesting tying it together. Its significance is just a 1, as it's very obscure and hardly ever spoken of, and it may be more relevant in its native country, but not here. Should you watch it? Maybe, but not if you hate bugs. Back in the States, on that same exact day, we got a really great entry, and we just saw little bugs, but how about a much bigger creature with Q, the winged serpent? We're in New York City, and oh my god, this is the scariest thing in any movie on this block. I would never, ever, ever do this job. But when a high-rise window washer suddenly loses his head, John Shaft and, oh, hey, it's David Carradine for the second time in this block. Harry Potter Sr. is also here, but there's also someone loose in the city skinning people alive. We get little flashes of something big swooping down to eat people, causing blood to rain down from the sky. Jimmy Quinn is a low-level crook and ends up on the run, hiding out on the top of the Chrysler building, but a cop hears him up there.
Hey, I hear you. Come on out, you get a year for this.
A year? For like trespassing? I mean, this cop doesn't know he's a wanted criminal. He just knows he's in a part of the building he shouldn't be in, and that's a year in prison? Man, New York is tough. Jimmy discovers a giant nest up there, complete with a big-ass egg.
I'm almost afraid of everything, but I've never been afraid of heights.
Well, I am, man, so get away from that edge. You're making me nervous. Turns out that the sacrifices are being made in the name of Quetzalcoatl, the Aztec god, by a cult, and it's up to Shepard teaming up with Jimmy Quinn to reveal the big bird's hiding spot and put it down. And this is the second appearance on the project by a great director, Larry Cohen, with his first being Full Moon High, and he wrote this one as well. The entire movie stemmed from one moment. When he was in New York City, he looked up the Chrysler building and said, that'd be the coolest place to have a nest. And there you go, the whole thing came out of that thought. Later, he was working on a film called I, the Jury, but he was fired from that one before it started production. Since he was already working with producers on this concept and was already in New York, they rushed pre-production in less than 2 weeks, throwing together the script in 6 days and rushed into shooting, in several instances with no permits. They used stop motion for the majority of the monster effects, with those being done by Randall William Cook and David Allen, but there were a couple of full-size models made as well. Ultimately, it would end up screening at the same time as I, the Jury, and did quite well, getting a fair share of strong reviews. Cohen would talk about this one very favorably, calling it his favorite of his films, and claims that the 1998 Godzilla film essentially just stole their concepts from it. And I love this one. I give it a 4. It's just a nice mix of monster stuff, character bits, and that weird cult storyline, and Moriarty is absolutely stealing this show. Its significance is a 3 since it's a little more well known, but it's still very firmly a cult feature. But it's got some known faces and Cohen in the chair. Should you watch it? Why? For yes. On that same day, because October 29th was just stacked, another release of a more comedic variety showed up with National Lampoon's Class Reunion. It begins back in 1972 as a group of high school students that includes Bud the Chud play a prank on Geeky Walter. 10 years later, everyone is assembled for their class reunion because it's in the title. But there's a mysterious person in a paper bag watching over them. Bob is here, and Flounder is here because he knows something about National Lampoon movies.
Pleased to meet you, James. Ooh, you got nice big jugs.
We have to.
And Nerdy Gary, and an assortment of oddball alumni. Ma Fratelli pops in, and Chuck Berry performs and manages to not pee on anyone, or tell them to smell his farts while saying, "I won't betray you." And I know that's an obscure reference, but what the hell. But then Mayor Ebert is on hand, and someone starts killing people, and they realize that they're all locked in. They discover that Walter has been in an asylum since the prank, but has now escaped. And this wacky group has to band together to survive Walter's fury. And this is from a director that we've already seen, but for a different type of project since it's Michael Miller, the guy who directed Silent Rage. And most of his filmography was action stuff, not exactly very comedy-oriented. The writer of the film was, though, since it was a very early script from John Hughes, shortly before he would take Hollywood by storm with Mr. Mom and Vacation, and then being the man to define being a teenager in the 80s. Later on, he admitted to not being that proud of this one, though, and said that he was fired from the movie and that his screenplay was butchered. It was the last of a thread of slasher and horror spoofs, most of which had already been covered on the project. Because it carried the National Lampoon name and was the movie that they did after Animal House, there was an assumption that it might have been a sequel, and people were disappointed when it clearly wasn't. There was also a story that the part of Hubert, played by Stephen Furst, was meant for John Belushi, as it seems very similar to the type of role that he would play, and he died not long before this movie started production. But there's no actual indication of that, and could very easily just be rumor, and Furst would have several other films where he plays a similar type of character. The reviews weren't great, and it ended up not making nearly as much money as they had hoped, and only pulled in $10 million at the box office. And I don't think it's awful, but it's not great either. I give it a 3. It's not as funny as you would hope. It has some weird plot points, and a couple of characters just straight up vanish. Its significance is a 2.5 since it's a little more known, part of the National Lampoon umbrella, and has a bunch of familiar faces, but never really took off in terms of recognition. Should you watch it? I'd say yeah, it's entertaining enough.
Hey man, have you ever thought of me as a woman?
No, but I have thought of you as a farm animal.
This next one debuted in Germany at some point in November of 1982. And hey, we're finally out of October, go figure. But it's unknown what date this ran, but it wouldn't run in the US until late 83. And it's The Black Room. A couple of lovers are killed and then buried by a man and a woman, and then later, Larry here is looking to rent a room and ends up at this place in the Hollywood Hills that is renting for $200 a month. And do you have any idea what that would go for now? He's renting from the murderous couple from the intro, and Larry is married with kids, but also picks up women and takes them to his new rental for sex, where he's spied on. He's told that Jason, the young man, suffers from a rare blood disorder that means that he needs constant blood replenishment, and the woman he lives with is his sister. Larry starts an affair with her and also brings up prostitutes.
Just keep the clock running. Sit on it, baby. Keep it warm for me.
How on earth had I never heard that phrase before in my life? And then I do this channel, and I hear it all the time. But then things turn a corner, and it seems that the siblings are using women to transfuse fresh blood into Jason. And then Larry's wife finds out about his black room and discovers that even though he told her about it and claimed it was all a fantasy, that it's all real. And this is an interesting little number. It was co-directed by Ellie Kenner, but he doesn't have many credits in the film world outside of this. There's only one other film on his IMDb, and it's an Israeli film from 1996 called Who's the Father? But the other co-director, as well as the film's writer, is Norman Thaddeus Vane, and he's more involved in the industry and has been on the project before with Frightmare. It's said that Vane had wanted to direct the film himself, but had to bring in Kenner in order to appease the film's financial backer, an Israeli businessman. This particular film was a low-budget number made for around $40,000 and features an early appearance by Shooter McGavin, in the same year that he would show up in Grease 2 and then start working a lot more regularly. It also has a brief and also pretty early on cameo from Linnea Quigley. It's weird because in the UK, it looks like that they allowed it for their theatrical run with the equivalent of an X rating, but its VHS version in 1983 was listed as one of the nasties and seized but not prosecuted. And this is a 3. I like a good chunk of what this was doing, and it's definitely a precursor to the whole 80s casual sex is bad thing, but it's also a bit too slowly paced and takes too long to make its point. Its significance is a 1.5 since it's super obscure, only recently gaining more attention, but it does have Linnea and McDonald in it. Should you watch it? Yes, it's a good, solid, slow burn, if not a great one. Here's one that has some opposing dates, but according to one source, it screened in America on November 5th. But it looks like it also ran in Italy in August. But it's the controversial Piranha 2, The Spawning. There's a couple of scuba divers, and they find this old shipwreck and immediately proceed to strip nude and engage in a little underwater dalliance because these people are adventurous. Like how do you even bring that up? I want to have sex with you, but only at the bottom of the ocean. Well, they're both chomped by a swarm of piranha, and we're on an island resort in the Caribbean. Chris here then enters his mother's bedroom where she's sleeping nude, and then essentially mounts her to drop a fish on her. And none of that is weird, right? And then Bradley Cooper is here, and what? That's not Bradley Cooper? Oh. Well, anyway, you may recognize young Chris from the Blob remake, but he's also apparently a big shot in the soap world. He did long runs on Another World, Guiding Light, and All My Children. There's also a police officer on hand that could be a droid, or possibly a vampire, or just might summon Pumpkinhead, I don't know. On the island, they celebrate the spawning, which is when a bunch of grunions spawn in the shallows. And they go scoop them up and cook them. Anne and Steve used to be a couple but are now divorced. And after they find a chomped up body in the water, Anne has to figure out what's going on. Because the resort's manager won't close the beaches because, you guessed it, tourism. But there's an added problem here. These aren't just any piranhas. Nope! These ones have wings. And clearly this is a sequel to Joe Dante's Piranha, and it is connected, and they do reference the events of the first film. but it is mostly unconnected. The genesis of the project was wild since Dante wasn't available to do this as he was busy with The Howling, so they hired Miller Drake to do it. And he came up with a number of ideas, and it was him that came up with the concept of flying fish. They then found financing through a Greco-Italian guy named Ovidio Assanides, who also directed the Jaws ripoff Tentacles and the Exorcist ripoff Beyond the Door. They then hired a young James Cameron to be the special effects director, but when Assanides fired Drake, Cameron would be promoted to director. But then, during shooting, the producer hated what Cameron was doing and began to dictate what the shots would be, essentially taking over as director. This was apparently a habit of his, as it was something that he did with Beyond the Door and another movie, Madhouse. Cameron was on set for what is said to be 4 days, and on those days, he wasn't allowed to call his own shots, question Assanides' decisions, or watch any of the dailies. Finally, on day 5, he was fired, with him claiming that Cameron's footage wouldn't cut together. Assanides would then rewrite most of the film, add a bunch of random nudity, including the intro scene. Then, Cameron would break into the editing room every night for several weeks and recut the film, but Assanides found out and restored it the way he wanted. Now, there are some that dispute the whole 5-day thing and say that Cameron was present for the entire shoot, but was simply not allowed to shoot things the way he wanted, but more seem to cite the first story, so that appears to be the most likely. The reviews were bad, and even though the budget was low at around $150K, it was a bomb upon release. After a while, Cameron was able to buy back the footage and recut the film to the original intention, and that version is available to view as well. And the best I can do here is a 2. This is just so dull and uninteresting and only had a handful of fun moments, not enough to call it so bad it's good. For significance, though, I have to give it a 3, even though it's not one I think that has been seen a whole lot, and outside of Henriksen, doesn't feature much in the way of names. But it's the kickoff to James Cameron as a director, and has been talked about so much because of the controversy that it's certainly gained some note. Should you watch it? I actually think not. It's pretty skippable.
Maybe we should get you to a doctor.
Aren't you a doctor?
No.
You're not a doctor?
No, but I'm a dentist.
You're a dentist?
Dr. Leo Bell, DDS, at your service.
Hi.
We're ending this one on a great note because on November 10th, we are blessed with the arrival of Creepshow. We meet an abusive dad who's looking to be thrilled, and this kid is Stephen King's son, and now is an amazing writer in his own right. Billy's dad threw away his comic book, and the creep shows up outside of his window. A sort of crypt keeper character, I guess, even if he doesn't talk here. He does show us the comic book, and we go into the stories within it. The first tale is Father's Day, which has Jackson Pollock and a group of his family members gathering, and they mention that the family patriarch, Nathan, was killed by his daughter by this ashtray, and he comes back for some Father's Day revenge. The second story, The Lonely Death of Jordy Verrill, features none other than Stephen King himself in his biggest role yet. He had a small appearance in Knight Riders the year before, but this was a much longer part. He finds a meteor and dreams about going to the Department of Meteors, where they have that same damn ashtray, but unfortunately, touching that thing seems to cause more trouble than he expected. The third tale is called Something to Tide You Over and has both Frank Drebin and Sam Malone, and involves Richard here getting revenge on his wife and her lover, and you hardly see her, but she's Dawn of the Dead's Fran. And his plot involves the ocean, the incoming tide, and once again, that ashtray. Next up is perhaps the most famous, called The Crate, and it has Father Malone, Stevie Wayne, George Romero's former wife, and Fritz Weaver, who, like Hal Holbrook, also played a priest in a horror movie with the Jaws of Satan. And when there's a mysterious crate found in the college that contains a vicious creature, Henry decides that maybe he can use it to his benefit. And oh yeah, Ashtray. The last story is titled They're Creeping Up on You and has Upton Pratt in his fancy upscale apartment complete with a fancy ashtray, and he's a germaphobe and hates bugs. And it turns out that they hate him just as much. And this one was by the great George A. Romero and was written by Stephen King, his screenwriting debut. Most of them were original tales written exclusively for the film, with the exceptions of Jordy Verrill and The Crate, which were based on previously published short stories. It was mostly shot in Romero and my hometown of Pittsburgh, and Tom Savini was brought in for the effects. It was on this film that he made his first fully animatronic monster with Fluffy, the thing in the crate. He would also cameo in the film as a garbage man. And they took an unusual tactic with the release of the film because Warner Brothers were nervous about it and concerned that it was going up against Halloween 3. So, earlier in the year, in July, they did a quick test release in Boston to see how to market it. It was a huge success there, which gave the bros the confidence that they needed for a wider release. And after the Season of the Witch faded quickly, it became a big hit. In fact, it was Romero's only film in his history to hit #1 on his opening weekend. The reviews were pretty good as well, and it would go on to make $21 million against a budget of $8, and was Warner's top-grossing horror film of the year. Of course, it would also go on to be a big hit on home video and cable, and spun off into an actual comic book with art by Bernie Wrightson. Plus, there was a sequel in '87 with Creepshow 2, and then an unofficial one in 2007 called Creepshow 3. Also, the Tales from the Dark Side TV series was essentially the TV spin-off, even though they couldn't use the title of Creepshow because of the rights issues. There would also be a web series and then a new series for Shudder in 2018 that's still going on. New comics and theme park attractions, and before I forget, Ashtray in the epilogue. And of course, I love Creepshow as well. I'm going to give it a 4.5. It's one of the best anthologies I have ever seen. It's still slightly uneven at times, but it's a wonderful movie and features a great mix of horror and comedy. Its significance is also a 4.5. I feel like this one has a ton of significance, is very well known, even more so nowadays, but never really became that big cultural boom that would have earned it the 5. Should you watch it? Yeah. End of story. So there you have it, most of October of '82 and going into November. And clearly my most favorite of this roster was Creepshow. But there was some really great stuff in here. Q was great. Tenebrae's great. There was some awesome films in this bunch. A lot of good stuff worth watching. Let me know which of these was your favorite down below. Let me know which of these you've seen before, which of one of these you'd like to see now, or maybe some of the bigger ones that you've heard of but just have been putting off. Let me know that in the comments. If you liked the video, hit like. If you like the channel, hit subscribe. And also think about going to my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines and help support the project and keep it going. And I hope you enjoyed this one, and we'll see you very shortly for another one, because there's always something going on the 80s Project.